Okay, so as you mentioned on the retreat, we'll do a kind of an espresso format of breath work, which would involve 3 rounds of 30 breaths.
Yeah.
We exhale at the 30th breath, hold for as much as we can or as much as we feel comfortable, then inhale for about 20 seconds,
Yeah.
and then back to normal breathing, and
Okay.
repeat 2 more times.
Great.
Okay, good. I got this right.
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so for you that you haven't done this, or this is the first time that you are exposed to breath work, it's important that you breathe from the diaphragm, from the belly. So sometimes it helps to put your arm on the belly here to make sure that you're not doing it with your chest, but involving the belly here. And just follow along if you want to try this out. Cool. So let's start. Two more. Round 2.
Okay.
Okay, here we go. Okay, third and final round. Here we go. Five. 2 more.
That was very good.
Thank you for doing that.
Pleasure. Now I felt very in sync with you, especially the last one. Very good.
Those of you that were thinking, what the hell, we were just doing this part of a what's called Wim Hof breathing, or commonly referred to as breath work. The idea is to kind of center yourself most of the time where, you know, the sources of our anxiousness, or maybe let's say excitement, let's call it this way, is probably not the fact that we're actually not breathing properly. We're not in touch with the breath that much. So this really helps us to kind of ground ourselves and really prepare. And I like to do things, as you guys know already, with some activities with my guests. Today we have a very special guest, Kevin Helas. He's an empowerment coach. We actually met with Kevin at a retreat that he helped facilitate. I'm very happy that you're doing this together.
Hey brother.
Thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you for inviting me. It's good to be here.
No problem. Likewise.
Yeah.
Pleasure.
Yeah.
Is there anything else? I know that you work a lot with men. Is there anything else that I need to add to the introduction?
Well, I was reflecting during the breath actually a little bit. It might be useful to say what my purpose is evolving to be and what I feel it to be. I've been very passionate about working with men for a long time. I've been involved in transformational work and in my own self-development, but also men's work for the past 15 years or so.
Wow.
But I've recently discovered, I think my search has been, just like many people, I think you end up you end up on this journey of your own, and then look to actually sort of support other people on the similar journey. So my purpose, I think, is about helping men come into a sense of themselves and to find a place to stand, and it's very much about belonging. Now I'm from New Zealand originally, and I've been over here 20 plus years, and my dad was from here, and you know, I've always had an interesting search with where is my home, you know, what is home about, you know, when I'm here I want to be back there, when I'm there I've got this other life here. But recently I've realized belonging is very much about coming home to yourself and being content and acceptant of yourself and myself. And I think it's very much a challenge for men these days, where finding that sense of self when perhaps they don't have the guidance, they don't have the sort of, maybe the role models in their own personal life, or they're often on that search by themselves. I think if you know, similarly for me, my search has predominantly been conducted by myself in partnership with other people, but increasingly I'm aware that that's something which it really helps to do it with other people, and particularly other men. There's something you can get from doing it, joining forces with other men in that exploration.
I couldn't agree more. This is, after all, Man with Purpose podcast, so it's great for you to actually start with that. Actually, that was one of my questions, is how did you came to this? And I can resonate so much. I've been also on a personal development journey, especially with men's work for the last maybe seven years or so. But the thread with me, and maybe it's, you kind of identify a little bit, is that it's been a solo journey for the most part of it. I didn't really discover men's work, as we was kind of referring to here, probably for the last maybe until 3 years ago maybe. Okay. And even then I was kind of dabbling with it a little bit, so curious to know, how did you stumble upon men's work? And actually maybe if you could also elaborate a little bit on that. Maybe there's men watching right now and they don't know they have any exposure to men's work. How would you describe it? What was your journey like?
Yeah, well, I should say that I think my step into this sort of field of self-development has been through I would call transformational work, and I first came across it after sort of going through some crises in my own life. Okay, so, or sort of points in time, you know, in quick succession, I married a woman here in London. She was from New Zealand, and we got married, and then it just rapidly went downhill, and I'm not even sure completely why, but it didn't last very long, and we ended up separating and divorcing within 5 to 6 months. And very soon after that, my dad got ill. He got bladder cancer, and it was terminal. And I ended up going back with him. So I went very quickly. I had a very big incidents in my life, and I actually then had some health problems on the back of that. Actually, the day my dad died, I had a gallstone attack. So I was in hospital the night my dad died.
Wow.
And the morphine, but it just triggered a real inquiry. It's like, whoa, what's going on here? And it led to me taking part in some transformational work with an organisation here in London called the Concord Institute. And this might all be new stuff, but it's a transformational program or institute which has been running for 20, 30 years. But it has lineage back to a lot of transformational work, which really, all it means is self-realisation. It's sort of people interested in tapping into consciousness, becoming more conscious and more empowered in their lives. And what's interesting about Concord, and I think we'll come back to this later, is that food is a key part of their program. So a relationship to food, understanding of nutrition at a very deep level, cooking with consciousness, really. So and what was very interesting about the programs they developed and still run is about coming into the body. So coming to the body through relationship with food, other body work, but then also having the discussion around what it is to be a human being. Why do we develop the way we do? Why do we carry these stories about ourselves? Why do we develop these characters that we end up fighting against in our lives? Why do we struggle? You know, it actually just maps out. A lot of the programs are very powerful because they map out at the human condition why this stuff occurs. It's a long answer, but through their organisation, I first stumbled into men's work. So I think someone introduced me to there's a certain field of men's work. There's a facilitator called David Data, who's worth looking at. Where the Superior Man. And his assistant actually runs courses. So I ended up doing a weekend course with him. And I was drawn to it just as I was curious, like most men, about what is it to be a man these days. And Data's take on it is that it's very important that we understand the differences between the masculine and the feminine, and that we embody those energies and we understand them. And know this is, in all this talk these days about inequality, we lose sight of the fact that we're very different and that we require different things, and actually polarity is essential in strong, healthy dynamics and relationships. So I did a weekend workshop with Eli Buren, the guy's name is, which again was it was the difference for me of doing transformational work, which was men and women. So workshops, in a group space of 20, 30 people, and it's a mix of men and women. Very different to being being in a space with 30 men. And you're doing a little bit of exertion, physical exertion, body work, but a challenge. And speaking direct and plainly and honestly. And this is something we'll probably come around to, but that kicked off something for me, because on the back of it, the weekend, I found it very, very nourishing. And we were all invited to start doing a men's group. And I think about 10 of us from that workshop got together and said, right, we'll start a men's group. And essentially that ran for the best part of 10 or 12 years, meeting fortnightly. It wasn't the same. There were about 5 members who stayed through, me being one of them. We stayed through the whole journey, and we had different people coming through. But that became a real touch point in my life, and very, very supportive in terms of just navigating life. We were given a bit of structure to start with from the data, some things to explore. But it ended up being very interesting, because we ended up having a circular leadership. So each of us would take a time as a leader to actually run sessions and to introduce different things. We did, group activities, and we ended up doing some sort of ventures together. I'm actually going to one of the guys in my group, I'm going to his stag weekend in a few months,
Nice.
So we're still in contact, and even though we got together not as friends, we became quite key parts, almost like observers in our others' lives, and sort of advocates for each other and supporters for each other, going through different things. But maybe we can talk more about that if you have.
Sure,
Yeah.
by all means, yeah. I mean, and just to kind of put a little bit of context at the time, how old are you when all of these things happened? You kind of found men's work?
Well, what am I going on? I'm 49 now, so I think it's in my early 30s, mid 30s.
Wow.
So 35, so yeah, well, it's been a while.
Wow. But yeah, the consistency for 10 years straight with these people giving each other honest feedback it's a challenging process, right?
Yes. And I must say that I've been fascinated by the journey of life and self-exploration. So, I've always had a radar for, different activities. Talked about doing sort of. I'm trying to think of other things I've done. I'm just curious. I'm curious about myself, and I'm curious about my own personal history and my things that have gotten in the way of myself, but also obviously going through life you end up encountering different things, and look for some support in those areas. And the good thing about Concord, it's a place I've kept in contact with I really delved into the food. Like I've always had a passion for food myself. I've always loved cooking, but there was something about the approach of this, and I think it's very interesting that the context of Concord and the training there is around our relationship with food and cooking as being part of our evolutionary process. So the things that made us human in the first place was our mastery of fire and our ability to cook food. You know, this stuff has been coming out in science over the last 5-10 years. It's probably longer, but that's how we evolved from ape to human, was that we cooked food and we were able to access the energy available in food, which meant we spent less time digesting and our brains increased.
I just got a mini boof.
If you want to read a book, there's a great book about how cooking made us human. There's a guy called Richard Wrangham who wrote a fascinating book about that. I can send you links to that, but it just makes complete sense. It's like, how did apes become human? Okay, well, they started to cook their food, and then they're not sitting around digesting raw food all day. Suddenly all the energy is available to fuel the development of their brains.
Wow. I never thought about it that way.
Yeah.
Wow, this is fascinating stuff. I personally discovered, I mean, I don't think I'm a good cook by no means, or stretch of the imagination, but I've discovered cooking food, that in particular cooking it for other people, to be a very meditative, kind of very therapeutic experience for some reason. And still to this day I cannot explain why. Is it because I'm in service for others, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I think that's part of it too. I think it's, even, you know, what I found myself, I ended up doing a lot of cooking courses myself, assisting in the kitchen on cooking, leading up to train. I actually properly trained in a year-long program called the Mastery of, what's it called? Mastery of Cooking, or Master of Whole Food Cooking, I guess. So it's cooking across a year, across all the seasons, and I've had the most amazing teachers who are classically trained, but they've gone into this way of whole food cooking but it's very much about tapping into these ancient traditions of cooking and sharing food together.
See,
you're exactly it.
Yes. You're leading to another great point. I lived in. I'm kind of in the flow, but I'll get to this. We were in Thailand, and when I went there, we were living all in a big house together. So everybody's entrepreneur, doing their businesses, yada yada yada. But there was something. All of us were men. Naturally, there was something special where everybody would stop for a moment, put their laptop away, and we just sit down and just eat food together. That was a very kind of bonding. You can feel almost the camaraderie.
Yes,
it's a very sacred process.
Yeah, and you look at things like the traditions, and my teacher will talk about this a lot. The man called Jean Tournay, he's one of my. I would say he's one of my spiritual mentors, really, because he's been working in this field of transformation, but really he's in the school of the Sufi, like the Sufi tradition in a way. Like in the heart of the Sufi sort of philosophy, the kitchen is at the heart of it. So it's almost like there's, you know, it's exactly that. It's a sacred place. It's a place where people come together, they share things, they when you cook consciously in that way, or you bring something together and you create something, you can feel it. You can feel it in the food. You know, when you actually take time and you are attentive and conscious in the way that you create the meal, the food tastes, and of course you source your food,
of course,
you know, responsibly, and you know where it's from, and it's of good condition and provenance. You eat the food, and you're nourished by it in a way you can't quite understand. You're sort of energized, and if you know how to cook as well, you bring the sort of flavor to it. It's not this is not like a sort of regime. This is like trying to be healthy. This is more a celebration. And it's constantly, I mean, it's sometimes hard to communicate that, because we don't often engage with food and eating and cooking in that way, and less these days. So that's very much a passion of mine, and it sort of continues, and I'm looking for ways to feed that in. I'm actually curious about, I have been doing cooking classes, and I'm sort of intending to start that up at some point as a way of experiencing that. What is it like to get together?
I'm with you. Now, the way your angle from kind of approaching this totally makes sense with what you're doing with men's work, and I can see how both are very complementary to each other.
Yeah.
Wow, okay.
Well, I have to say too that the key thing with Concord, and the key thing I've discovered, and also the challenge for men is I think it's very we're quite disconnected from our bodies, and I've read some interesting things about that. That I think when we're young and we're in our power in our 20s and 30s, we feel indestructible, and
Yes.
our body's the machine that just gets us around. And if we engage with it, we're looking to sort of test it and to expand on it. And for me, it's only as I sort of things started breaking down, and you feel that vulnerability, that you realize that's also important. That you actually sort of have to nourish yourself, and part of that nourishing is a softening and a listening that comes, and the questioning that goes around that is how do I, who am I, and how do I feel, what's going on for me, and I think this is what intrigues me, because I think a lot of men's lives, and certainly the same for me, a lot of men's lives are very goal driven and very very project driven. We're like, purpose, what are we doing? Da, 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 da.
Typical masculine, right? Just
Yes, and that's, there's nothing wrong with that at all, but I think what can often get lost is really getting a sense of what's going on for us and who we are, especially when those things start sort of crumbling a little bit. It's like maybe the career that you've sort of had your heart set on, or you're sort of, it's not going anywhere, or maybe it is going somewhere but you don't feel right about it. It's those times where you go, well, what do I actually really want to do beyond my own sort of goals and careers and objectives, or maybe the responsibilities I have as a partner or a husband or a father. I need to be the breadwinner, I need to be this and that. All those things are up in the air at the moment too. It's like, hold on, okay, it's all been questioned. No longer is it, it doesn't feel right always to do the 9-to-5 job, but I go to work and maybe both of us work, or there's a lot of questions around what it is to be a man these days, and a lot of confusion, but also a lot of opportunity, I think. And it's a great time to be going, okay, what be curious about how we feel, connect to our hearts, and what's really true for us.
I totally can relate. Like, that word curious is probably the best way to describe me. I've always tried to be curious, and like whenever sometimes I'm like jealous, for example. I mean, way back in the 20s right now, when there's a female present and someone else is talking to her, and that really confused me so much, and I started asking questions, but why is it that I feel this way? What's the thing that triggers? And I kind of started diving into the pickup artists and the whole kind of how to pick up women, but I realized that was just a stepping stone to something much deeper. Actually, mature, deep masculine structures, like archetypes, and this whole. It's a difficult thing. I recently recorded a podcast, and I was trying to explain how would you convince someone of this masculine language that's happening. It's almost invisible for most men. Have you noticed that? Like, most guys are like, I think most people, when they think about men, they just think about mature male human being. I think there's a sort of a very deep meaning to the word man that I think most people aren't necessarily connected. And again, I'm still on my own journey in discovering that. How would you, if someone was like, what is this guy talking about right now? How would you? What is a man to you? Let's put it this way. What's your kind of understanding of that?
Okay, well, it's a very good question, and I think it comes back to I can only sort of talk from my own experience.
Of course.
And I think the feeling for me was that I had difficulty sort of coming to manhood, as I think a lot of men do. And I've been exploring, this is partly why I've been so curious around, and exploring this over the last 20, 30 years, I think, is looking at what happened in my life, which might have sort of led to my journey, and also just gaining acceptance around it and some peace around it. I would say it was quite formative for me when I was about 10 or 11. My father had a nervous breakdown, and that had quite an impact on me. Firstly, because I didn't really know what was going on, and no one ever really told me. It's like,
so it's not like someone prepares you for something like this, right?
They don't prepare you for something like this, but even afterwards, I didn't. I've been learning things since of what happened at that time. But I think I think I made a decision a little bit at that time that life is pretty scary. You know, my dad sort of was overwhelmed with his work. He'd stepped up into another role, and it was too much for him to handle. And he really he just broke down, and it scared me. It scared me like, you know, something in me made the equivalent of responsibility, fatherhood. You know, you're going to be in danger. You're going to collapse.
I want to stay away from that.
And I was upset at him. You know, I felt sort of that he was my hero and he was my guide into manhood, and I somehow felt I lost him right in that moment. I lost him, and I was really angry at him. It's funny talking about it, but I think I held myself back to get back at him. Sort of I found life up until then quite smooth and easy. You know, I enjoyed playing sports. I was very good at artistically and creatively and academically very good. But I would then, from then on, sort of hold myself back from stepping into places of responsibility and visibility.
Because of what?
Because of the fear of what might happen, but also somehow to sort of get back at my dad. And now that's very personal to me, but it's indicative of that thing of not having clear guidance. I think even when I was seeking guidance, I would always have to go to my dad and ask for it. You know, it was sort of never. There were difficult times I was going through in puberty and stuff. I was self-conscious and a bit insecure, and I thought I was a late developer, and then I was confused around sexuality for a while, and I'm like, you know, I think a lot of it was just normal stuff, but instead of being reassured, it was like there was sort of silence, and I'm just very conscious of that now. I've got a young son, and my boy's 15, 16 months, so he's at a wonderful age, but I'm excited about having a son and the opportunity to really support him into the vast spectrum of what a man is. I don't think there's only one thing.
Exactly, it's difficult to pinpoint.
But I think the big thing about manhood is just coming into an acceptance of yourself as you are. I think that's the key thing, you know. And I think purpose is key to that. I think it's really great you're doing this and exploring what is purpose, what is that about, you know. And essentially, purpose is about connection to who you are, and true to who you are, really. So that they go hand in hand, and it's like finding a self-acceptance. I should mention as well, like, I've grappled with the sense of what it is to be a man, because I think in the world, the feeling of being a man is that it's dog eat dog, you know. And I think that's just the reality of how it is. It's like, it's you up against every other man. You're basically in competition from day one. Now, a lot of that is really healthy. I think a lot of that men really respond to, and it's part of what we respond to challenge and we grow from challenge. But there's also a sort of wariness that comes from it. It's like I think, and I'm actually starting a research project. I sort of mentioned to you. I'm calling it the Man to Man Project, and it's only just emerged the last few weeks actually. And it's by virtue of being in doing all this men's work and being in men's workshop, and witnessing how quickly that competition just vanishes if you're in a room with men in a workshop and you're invited to just talk about your truth. It's almost like you can feel that. I'm curious what you thought about it. You know, coming on a Friday evening, and you know, this is often how it works on the workshop. People, 20 or 30 men step into a room and step into a circle, and they're all a bit apprehensive and, like, you know, chatting a bit beforehand, and then they sit down and then they're told, well, how do you feel? And you go around, and by the end of the circle, you're effectively brothers. You're like, okay, I hear that.
I can relate to the other person. Yeah, for me, I think I can resonate so much with so many things you said about the fathers and the same relationship there. There was silence, and I was just always like looking at my kind of dad as not being a man, so it was difficult for me to relate to him to him being maybe a role model that I was looking for. To answer the question, yeah, initially I think in my early 20s I had this kind of really boyish, a little bit childhood kind of evil competition. Oh, I'm better than everybody else. The more and more, like you said, I got comfortable with myself, my truth, and when I specifically went to the retreat, it wasn't so much of that, oh, there's a competition here so much, but I'm actually curious what everybody else's experience is. And the moment we dove into that, and we heard everybody, I could relate to pretty much all the 35 men or so that were there. And instantly, yeah, the camaraderie was there, the sense of brotherhood for me personally was there. Maybe because I've been exposed to some of that already, but naturally how I felt. And it's a very therapeutic experience that I think most men, especially in today's world, now we kind of said, okay, suppress the emotions, don't be a pussy, and man up and suck it up, and whatever that means, natural human emotions that both men and women experience.
Yeah.
And then almost I kind of feel that we're kind of left with a ticking time bomb, and then people, men becoming headlines of, oh, the nicest guy ever, I didn't expect that to happen, or something like this.
Well, I read this morning that it's very interesting. I've been reading a lot about Tyson Fury, and he's fighting today.
Yes.
And his battles with mental illness. And I just read a report saying that suicide's the biggest killer of men under 45. And it's sort of you understand why, actually, because people, and I think that's what I'm really interested about is, there's different levels to this, but this is why I'm doing the research project. I'm going to basically ask people questions about what their relationship is with other men. How do they feel? How do they feel with other men in their life? How open and honest do they feel they can be? And I know for myself that there's a guardedness. It's sort of, this is obviously one aspect of how we are in the world, but I think we potentially miss out on a lot of support through people who are in our lives, through our own sort of wariness to really reveal ourselves. And I think that's from anecdotally, talking to men and people talking in the group about, well, I've shared things on this retreat that I've never shared with my closest friends for 40 years, and why is that the case? Why is that we can't really talk about what's going on to the men that are in our lives? And how that's actually probably the hardest challenge, is to, it always comes, you always hear it after the effect. You say, I thought he was okay, I had no idea. These are men that are incapable of really saying what's going on to people who are in their lives. And it's not just men, this isn't just a male situation, but I think that there's something, once you see the other side of that actually it's very natural for men to be available and to be supportive and to be loving, it's quite an odd experience. It's like, well, that was really easy to access. How can we then, maybe we need to look at that. Maybe we need to be a little bit brave
100%
in terms of being vulnerable. I think it's very recent, but there's an amazing piece to video which Danny Cipriani just recorded yesterday. He was a close friend and was actually with Carolyn Flack. But he's just come out and recorded something to camera about all the emotion around that, and it's a very powerful piece. It's worth checking out.
For sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Why? Okay, let's dive deep into this, because this is a fascinating topic. Why do you think that is? My explanation of kind of thinking about it and talking to other men and reading a lot about it, watching documentaries, is that when the Industrial Revolution came, before that you had the father and the son relationship very close.
Yeah.
But since the Industrial Revolution, that sort of belongs to work now, and the boy is kind of left alone, and there's kind of this void developing and shadows coming in. And do you think, obviously today's society is very, very different, like fast forward 200-300 years after that, maybe rites of passage that's missing, or maybe a combination?
Yeah, well, I'm sort of a student of this as well, but there is a very good book and a very good teacher to check out called Warren Farrell. He co-wrote a book called The Boy Crisis, and he actually he says exactly that it sort of stems from a societal change at the turn of the century, the Industrial Revolution. It used to be that men boys would follow an apprenticeship, and they would sort of be in the company, they would be sort of ushered into manhood simply by being around other men, and that's how boys actually learn very well. Through witnessing and observing. And I see that now with my son. Like he's fascinated by me cooking. He wants me to hold him while I'm cooking, and he's like stirring stuff. And it's just, you just feel it. You feel like, I want to emulate my elders. And you're right, there was a change when suddenly the man is going to work all day, and the boy is only, it's a very good phrase, the boy is only seeing his father through his mother's eyes. And often that can be quite a negative thing. So you'll get into that whole dynamic of relationships where he's so lazy, does nothing around the house, da 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 da. And of course the father comes home and either he's tired or disinterested or has no energy to be involved, and you know, so it compounds the sort of situation. And yes, and socially there's no, especially in our culture, or my culture, whatever, there's no real rites of passage, or there's no real, the only rites of passage we have is we get kicked out of the house, we go to university.
There we go.
You know, we go nuts, you know, but that's not something which is
a healthy way
chaperoned.
Yeah.
You know, it's more like just go crazy, you know, and work it out for yourself, you know, and hopefully you've got the values in place that guide you through those times. And there's been plenty of people speaking about that, but young men are aching for belonging at that time. They're exploring and they're trying to find themselves, but it's no wonder they get caught up in gangs and places which have models and they have hierarchies and
structures.
They have,
exactly. Yes.
You know, things which actually the things they're looking for. They're looking for community and connection. And in the absence of positive ones, they'll find the other ones.
Yeah, perverted versions of maybe some kind of fraternities or, like you said, gangs.
Yeah.
Like I can relate to every single thing that you said. Being seen, my father through my mother's eyes, which showered me with love, out of good intentions, of course, but he was out, you know, busting his ass and working all the time. And I kind of naturally developed more of a relationship with my mom than I did with my dad. And I can't remember what, I think I read this in an article. According to the Home Office here, majority of the crimes that are happening are done by individual fatherless males, 18 to 24 to 25.
Yeah.
So whenever people say, oh, men and women are the same, well, actually there is differences. I don't want to get into this political argument, but I think there is a clear role that elderly male serves in a boy's development in life. Yeah. And if that's missing, then all these sorts of things kind of tend to manifest because healthy masculinity isn't present.
Yes, and that unfortunately now examples of leadership, you know, all those things are breaking down, aren't they? It's sometimes difficult to think of roles, people who embody a mature masculine, because even in, you know, the people that we celebrate are people who celebrate through, you know, celebrity and sports achievement and business achievement, which most recently has been more about, again, the sort of alpha dog who just, you know, destroys everyone else in order to get to the top.
Sure.
Which, you know, that's not exactly a mature form. It's
not at all, right?
Yeah.
People see all the flashy stuff and like all the kind of, you know, how do you say, trickles and the kind of the success of it, but obviously there is a story behind it. Obviously there's a lot of pain and a lot of sacrifice, but that's not necessarily a masculine role model that you should be. Very rarely would you have someone that's very successful and also have a clear set of structures that you know men can actually relate to.
And values.
Yes, and values. Yes, that's the one.
And I think that, I guess that's why I'm really I'm very passionate about the work I do now, because it's. And again, it's a departure from what I trained in. I trained in design. You know, I spent my whole life doing creative work and working in that field, which again, it had a sort of coaching element to it, or a mentoring element, because I ended up doing a lot of coaching with my clients around vision. You know, and I think vision and purpose are again interlinked, but it's about where, you know, how do you want your life to be? You know, what are you working towards, and how do you want to feel? You know, without getting caught up in pictures about things, but just going, well, you know, are you working towards this or not? You know, and if you're not, then maybe you need to reevaluate things. And then, of course, things will come up around, you know, maybe blocks or sort of beliefs that you have about whether you can do things or not, or, you know. So I ended up myself getting to a point where that line of work wasn't really working for me, wasn't nourishing me. And I actually ended up having some health issues around it, you know, just going into work every day, primarily stress related.
Yeah, I can
so
relate. I can relate.
Living in anxiety. It's like, Jesus, I'm going in week to week just to earn a crust, and I'm dreading it every Monday morning, and I'm just getting through the week, and my body was starting to tell me this is not right. So your body will tell you.
Did you manage to listen to the body and you're like, okay, I need a bit of a time off, or?
Well, I should tell you, I mean, I had a few sort of incidents happen. This is over the last 2 or 3 years. I actually had testicular cancer, end of 2018, which again was a bit of a shock, but it was also not a complete surprise. I was lucky that I caught it. It's quite something to go through, but I actually had a testicle removed, and that thankfully has been clear since. But that was the first wake-up call.
Do you attribute that to all the anxiousness and the stress?
I think so. I think well, we could talk about this as well, but I'm very much a believer that cancer, from an Oriental medicine point of view, is about stagnation.
Curious.
Yeah, well, you know, it's never clear. There's not like this is responsible for it, but in that theory, in the theory of Eastern medicine, cancers often form in places of the body where where energy is not moving. Okay, so there's a stagnation. And you'll be aware of the idea of chi and energy moving through the body.
Yeah.
You'll find that most cancers occur in places of the body which are designed to expel or secrete. So you have the sort of cervix, and you have the breast cancer, and you have different zones of the body. For men, testicular cancer is a strong one. There's a concentration of energy there. If it's not moving, not circulating, it can be.
That makes a lot of sense.
It can be susceptible to cancer. I think that's more. You can create an environment, for these things to occur.
Predisposition for something like this to happen.
I think I always had a bit of pain in that area, which I think I might have been a sort of a slight blockage or something as well physically. So I'd always had a bit of a nagging problem where it occurred. But I think stress, obviously, that's a great driver for illness. So it was a good indicator that things weren't quite. Especially if you look at energetically around, the areas of the body. I can only say this because both my parents passed away from cancer, and they had cancer in certain areas of the body, which made perfect sense in terms of afflictions they had or difficulties they had in expression, or So I felt that my creativity was being suppressed. I was being frustrated. I was almost trapped in this position. So. Yeah, I'm sort of going into it a bit much, maybe. No, but I think it is interesting to reflect on. I certainly have an attitude around illness or things like that. They are messages, and they're actually. Your body is often telling you to look at a wider understanding of it, and to make changes in your life. And to step back and go, okay, I need to make some changes here. It's not working. So what do I need to do?
I gotta tell you, I'm a big believer in what you're saying. Having been through 2 heavy burnouts, I could also feel again that there's a manifestation of energy being stuck, and I'm like, oh shit, hopefully that doesn't unlock something, God forbids, right? A lot of my actually relatives, my cousin who was 15, 2 uncles, my grandparent, they all passed away due to cancer.
Right.
So I'm like thinking, okay, I think that maybe there is some correlation there. Maybe it's predisposition or genetics or whatever. But I'm a big believer that food is big one, and also stress. And these are the body has an intelligence that is sometimes far way superior than what we think on a conscious level, I think.
Yeah.
So it's important to be able to be aware of this, to tap into this and say, oh, hang on a minute, maybe I need to kind of slow down a little bit. Yeah.
And I think actually this is a really important area because I've latterly come to the realization that stress and anxiety is really important to look at, and because of the way that we live in a sort of a heightened state, and it's recently been coming through a lot of really interesting study around this, what's it called, the polyvagal system, which is the sort of the central nervous, or it's a part of the nervous system which regulates our state of fight or flight. And I think for myself, I've been doing some work around this to bring awareness around that, and to recondition it a little bit, and it's very interesting to sort of clock into that. You know, this is part of knowing who you are. It's knowing how your body operates and what state you're operating in. And I realized that for whatever reason, you know, there's a few reasons, but I certainly was living in a sort of a semi-survival state. And looking at that area, or just tuning into the body and going, what's really going on for me? Just noticing that level of anxiety that I would just very quickly go into. And what we end up doing, we get comfortable in those states, and we actually perpetuate those states. So we're comfortable in work where we're under stress, and we're sort of designed to sort of be go, go, go. You know, we drink a lot of coffee.
So much, yeah.
Yeah. I've recently explored, I've been working with a guy, he's a somatic experience therapist, and he's someone, and that's a really fascinating body of work. If you, again, I'll pass on links. It's something developed by a guy, Peter Levine, where he realized that he was dealing with people who had various trauma in their lives, and he developed this technique which was about just sort of coming into understanding a relationship with their body and releasing the trauma which was trapped in their body. And
this whole psychosomatic, the mind and
the
body
psychosomatic system. And what's amazing about it is it's not like therapy where you're sitting there and trying to work out what happened.
You're using the body.
You're just using the body, so you don't even know what's coming out or why it's coming out, but it's there. It's a little bit like the breath work. It's a similar experience.
For sure.
Where you're just tuning into the non-conscious system of the body to release whatever's trapped. And I think people are starting to realize that. It's really interesting how the Wim Hof stuff is taking off, because all these techniques are actually designed to come into sort of awareness with the body and to access them and release and heal the things which are trapped in the body.
Yes.
Yeah.
The body knows. The body unconsciously just, it feels good. I recently started getting more and more into bioenergetics, which is exactly that, the psychosomatic relationships, building charge in a certain place in the body, and afterwards releasing the charge. The whole idea of this psychosomatic relationship is that if you're going through stress or trauma or something, that's gonna is gonna manifest somewhat into the body, whether it's in the pelvic area, the chest here, or people may be very tense around the traps or the shoulders. That's gonna manifest, and we do sort of different exercises where you start shaking, and most of the time when we're going through a fight or flight or freeze type of scenario, we're like, oh, relax, it's okay. But actually, there is a benefit, there is a value of shaking. Think about a lion when it's chasing a gazelle. Afterwards, they need to kind of shake. It's releasing of that energy.
It's a reset.
Yes. So there's clearly a lot of value into that. Wow. The body, you change state instantly. Like I've been doing a lot of Tony Robbins, and he's very big on changing your state. In other words, your physiology, how you can influence that, and emotions would follow after that. But it's that initial kind of push to, oh, I don't feel like doing it, and start doing it. So I think one of the reasons why Wim Hof took off is exactly that, this kind of ancient intelligence of the body. It just knows and is attracted to it. Wow, okay, interesting.
I'm curious what your next question, where we go from here.
Well, actually, I wanted to kind of sort off the back of that, if, for example, someone is rediscovering this work, let's say, men's work, and all of this is part of that, it's not just sharing, it's already getting into our bodies, how could they, so we even touched upon a little bit on rites of passage. Is there, because I think there's still ways of doing that in a healthy way. I know it's slightly different. It's not these kind of ancient traditions where you'd get circumcised or you have to kill an alien. You have to kill a dangerous animal with a spear. But you're from New Zealand. I think you're connected very much with the Maori culture. What are some rites of passage there, and maybe what can men today potentially do? Go through kind of a similar experience, not as intense probably. I'm not going to volunteer for something like that, but
I'm curious about that actually. I think it does require guidance. I think it is looking for mentors or looking for people that you respect. You know, because I think that's how we learn as men. We need our teachers. You know, and I think it's firstly just acknowledging that, you know, you're looking for something else. I think that people now, you know, particularly, how old are you?
30, I'll be 31 in a few months.
Right, yeah. So I think it's great. There seems to be a desire or that sort of exploration.
Yearning for my manhood.
Yeah.
I'm longing for
there's
this.
a longing. Yeah. And at first it's acknowledging that, and it's. I think sometimes it's if you have that feeling, it's really owning that feeling and inviting. I think that's very powerful if you set intentions in your life. Again, this is something I've picked up through my exploration. You don't always have control over things in life, but if you set your clear intentions, not knowing how they're going to sort of map out, they can be very powerful things that work in your favour. If you declare it, you know, look, I invite, you know, mentors into my life. I invite the mature masculine into my life. You might be very surprised what shows up and what invitations throw your way. You know, and of course it's building your own tools and resources. You know, I think in the way that you have, I think, is a sort of establishing disciplines. You know, be curious about disciplines. How can I look after my body, my well-being? Where can I can have fun and you know, enjoy life and have times where I'm just, you know, going wild a bit. That's also important.
Okay. Yeah, there's benefit to that.
But it's understanding the dance of that. You know, it's like, is it getting out of control? Do I need to sort of pull back from this? Exercising honesty in your male relationships. Maybe in the answer, coming roundabout in a long way, is almost about what is the value of men's work and why would you look at doing men's work? What do you get from it? And I would say it's being with men in an honest and open way, in a space where you can really voice what's going on and be heard and uninterrupted, and also challenged. And this is the benefit I get, you know, it's actually a very natural activity to sit in a group of men. It might feel very unfamiliar, you might never have done it, but for most men, the minute they do it, they go, there's something about this of sitting in a circle and just each man sharing their truth. It's actually a very familiar experience, and it's familiar because we've done it throughout thousands of years.
It's cross-generational, right? I think it goes years back, yeah.
It taps into a very primal experience of being a man, because that's what we did. We would you know, be in our cave, or we'd be, and you know, the women would be off doing this stuff and they'd be doing the women's stuff, and every now and then the men they'd be having their projects and their adventures, and then they'd get together and they'd talk about it, and the boys would run around and they'd see what it is to be the warrior and the slightly older man and the family man and the elder, and they'd see the archetypes play out. You know, they'd live in community. You wouldn't be in an insular nuclear family, for one. You'd be in a tribe, and you'd have different models. You know, you would, and we're missing all that. So that's a good commitment to make. You know, it's a commitment I made this year. I realised that I need to find my tribe. I need to find my tribe, and I need to let it find me.
Okay.
So maybe that's it. Put it out there. Just be open to your tribe, and that means a band of brothers.
Yes.
Doesn't have to be just men, but men you can share yourself with. There's something about, if you create the space of just speaking with men, separate from the partners and the couples, you're going to have a lot more freedom.
That has a place, but it's a different dynamic, yeah.
Yeah, and they're often that dynamic will run the show. There's too much interplay going on, and within the couples, you're not actually free. Yeah. You know, I find myself in social events where I'm like, I didn't actually speak to anyone because it was just the conversations.
I had the same thing when I'm when I was in a relationship. I'm kind of thinking about the dynamic here as opposed to I'm just kind of free, even though there wasn't necessarily a taboo of stay with me type of thing, but unconsciously or consciously, I'm constantly thinking about I'm kind of around that area.
Yeah. So I'd say the value of men's work is just being with other men, and I think I think maybe because of sometimes there might be a natural tendency to go, well, I don't get a lot out of my male friendships, so why would I bother? But actually the value is that it's an opening into a possibility of male friendship. you know. And I realize, even late in the day, it's taken me a long time, but I realize I can go back into my male friendships now and try and establish a bit more vulnerability in myself and a lot more curiosity about them and where they are in their lives, which I've started to do, you know, very simple things, just how are you, you know, well, that must be difficult for you, what's going on?
That opens just a whole type of like different type of conversation. I think the deeper level conversation where you can just listen there, be present, and hold space for the other man. Yeah.
Because deep down, I feel like I'm very fortunate. I went to a boys' school, and I have friends from that time, which it's totally unconditional brotherhood. And we've never even really discussed it, but you know,
it's kind of an unspoken truth.
It's sort of it's just there. And I made a point of actually reaching out this last year, where I was going through difficult times. I made a point, right? I've really got to nourish that and ask for help.
Yes.
And connect with those people and say, look, I'm going through a tough time. I just want to tune in and connect with you guys. And, and you know, that, especially with what's going on for men these days, if we can learn how to do that, to actually step into that space and to get the support before it's needed, rather than have all these, you know, reports after the effect of, oh, it was so terrible. And you know, this is our opportunity to start inviting that vulnerability and that the support we need in our lives, and it's quite unique coming from other men.
Yeah, I've noticed that I've done quite a lot of work, and similar to what you said about starting inquiring, I've always had a bit of a love-hate relationship with London, so it was almost like a limiting belief that I cannot find a tribe here, right? But I started going to a lot of these conscious events, men's circles, at the event that we did together, for which I'm super grateful for. A lot of ecstatic dancing. You kind of see your vibe attracts your tribe type of thing.
Nice.
People come into your life and you're like, oh, I can actually have a conversation with you without feeling judged or without feeling kind of, you know, overthinking what I'm supposed to say and thinking about how it's going to come out. I did notice that, however, every single time you're in a mixed group of men and women, there's this kind of challenge and maybe tendency. It's natural. I think sexuality is a very big part of our masculinity. As guys start kind of showing off a little bit more, I'm like, okay, cool. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just a very natural response. But there is something different where females aren't present, and I'm not saying that's good or bad, but just a different dynamic which we need to honor and respect. Between men, just sitting down and having a conversation, and the powerful conversations. I'll tell you that.
I love what you said. Follow your vibe. Is that? Find your tribe.
Your vibe attracts your tribe.
Okay, and I think this is something I've been reflecting on as well. Like bringing consciousness to how we're living. You know, be fully accountable for how your life is occurring. You know, that's one of the basic principles of transformational work. Don't blame anyone else for your life. You know, be curious about it, but be responsible for it. So
take responsibility,
yeah, because you know, if things aren't, that's part of finding out who you are and what you really want to do in your life. A step to that is you know, doing more of what you love. It's just really simple stuff, but also saying no to stuff that you don't like. You know,
big thing.
Stop. Don't feel obligated to do stuff. But be responsible, you know, set your boundaries and go, no, that doesn't work for me. That doesn't work. That social group doesn't work for me anymore. You know, I just think, you know, it's come to a close. Thank you very much. You know.
Yeah, it's okay. People go through different phases, and people come for these phases. They serve a purpose, but afterwards, it's you have to kind of either level up or just kind of, it doesn't serve me anymore. Yeah, man, as if, I can relate to every single thing you're saying, like as if you're describing my life, and we haven't really had that type of conversation, but it's exactly that, Being able to establish a lot more boundaries, say a lot more no, because that's a difficult thing. Normally as a lover, if you will, I'm very much a people pleaser, or have been a people pleaser to the point where I'm like, you know what, that's no longer working for me. And people are like, whoa, I wasn't expecting that. And you kind of really start taking more and more responsibility, which I guess is a difficult thing, and I can see why most people, not just men, will kind of shy away from it. But that's really where you take the reins back, and that's where all the change begins to really manifest.
Well, I can give like a little I don't know, anecdote around that is that this last year has been a real journey for me in coming to terms with my anger and my resentment, to a point where I didn't realize it was actually connected to my inability to establish boundaries. So my inability to say what I wanted. So people would always be, crossing my boundaries, and I'd be unhappy about it, and I'd be very angry about it. But it's because I never really stated what my boundaries were in the first place. So I'm always being reactive. So I'm a constant this battle around, especially in my close relationships, and and then I'd end up carrying all this resentment around it. And I realized that there's this vicious cycle around that of fear of getting angry, and then people stepping on my boundaries which I haven't actually voiced, and getting angry anyway, and then resentful for it as if they should know.
Yeah. I can relate to that. I've been sort of kind of being in a pattern where I've been a little bit passive aggressive. I would say yes, even though internally I'm saying no to myself.
Yes.
And on the way there, I'm huffing and puffing, and I'm like, why am I like this? And afterwards, I reached the same conclusion. I don't set clear boundaries. I do not communicate it. Everything is inside my head. Yeah. And afterwards, I get all inside anxious and caught up in... I'm not an angry guy. It's just if you put a lid on it, it's again like a ticking time bomb. Yeah. Oh, wow. That's certainly something I can relate to.
Yeah, and again, when we talk about all this stuff, it's sort of out of a curiosity. It's all in the spirit of that inquiry, and it's important to do that. It's not to sort of beat yourself up and say, oh God, that's me doing that again. And that's been a journey for me, because I think we all have this thing. It's like, if you're angry, I don't have a problem with anger. I'm not really that angry, but we have to be honest. We have to sort of go, well, okay, when anger comes up, what happens? Yeah. How do I respond? Or am I actually angry? Maybe I am. I tell myself I'm not angry, but it doesn't look like it. There's anger there, but I'm not letting it out, or I'm not finding a way to express it healthily, or and it's amazing how that's something you've just got to just keep a curiosity about, but then just navigate very carefully, and suddenly one day you find that you're not reacting to things you normally did, or you're not approaching things in the same way.
Yeah, I think you said it beautifully. Just curiosity, slowly kind of start chipping away from this, because even I'll give an example from my personal life. Even when I went to the retreat, I thought I've dealt with all the relationship with my dad, and there's no resentment there. But funnily enough, all of a sudden this sense of this feeling of anger came up for me. I'm like, whoa. Where is this coming from? And I was like, okay, let's I invite it here. Let's just process it, explore to see where that goes. And as again, coming back to something I didn't maybe address with my dad. So even though we think on a very kind of superficial, conscious level that I'm all good, everybody's keeping the smile, the mask on. Yeah. There is stuff that needs to be dealt deeply. Otherwise, it just keeps biting you back.
We can be very. What's the word? Messy creatures, or like unreliable creatures. We sort of sometimes we protect this stuff. It's like oh no, I've got closure around that. But you actually deep down, in the basement, you've stored something.
You've locked something there that you don't want to go out.
Yeah. I want to keep that for later. That's mine. That's.
And it takes a lot of bravery. People think, that's some silly stuff. Actually, it takes a lot of courage to be able to, I think you said it the first time that really kind of caught my attention, see and be seen. There's a lot of courage, a lot of bravery that actually standing there vulnerable, whether you're crying or screaming or shouting or, it's deep work. It really takes a lot of energy to show up like that.
Well, I think it's a bit like a Pandora's box. I think it was very uncomfortable for me to explore my resentment. It sort of came up during a point in time last year through my relationship, but I realized how it ran through a lot of my whole life, and especially in relationship to work. And it ties into this thing of being competitive and wanting to be empowered, wanting to be in power, but then sort of holding myself back, and then being resentful for the other people that were empowered or were leading things, and it would manifest a lot of my work situation. And I'd always find myself in a position where, I was just under the main guy and wanting to be the main guy, but not quite there. and then being resentful for not being allowed to be there. But I was sort of being protected by not being the main guy at the same time. But what was keeping it all running was this resentment that would build up, and it ended up being paralyzing. Of the fear of actually stepping forward. So I would then create the situation where I could blame other people for it.
Yeah. A natural thing. I mean, in my personal life is always easier to kind of put responsibility somewhere else rather than to take it. Yeah. I think it's a theme for probably most men that are watching this, maybe that are brave enough to be able to admit that, because it takes a lot of guts to even reach to that conclusion in the first place.
Well, it's also a relief. I think we talk about being brave, but I think it's a relief once you just own more and more of your humanity, and your fallibility. That's part of being a man. I think there's the whole idea of being this sort of insurmountable figure. I think we all grapple with that. This sort of like being this invulnerable.
Yes.
But actually, we realise that we respond to vulnerability. We respond to imperfection. And the more we have examples of imperfect, but mature masculine energy. It doesn't mean being a pushover, but it's actually being flexible. We look at someone like Trump. He's an easy mark in terms of someone who just won't give an inch, and that's not inspiring. That's that's the worst example of the classic boy as man.
It's
like it's a toddler in the White House, really.
Exactly.
It's just the guy who's just fighting to be at the top and
succeed at any cost.
Succeed at any cost, trample on everyone. It's just playground rules. Whereas, the more we can give ourselves permission to be imperfect and to be vulnerable, the more freedom it gives us. It's like, oh my God, you can actually relax. The minute you sort of open those things up, it's like, oh my God, what a relief! I don't have to carry that anymore.
And still be masculine. I think David Helas said that consciousness is masculinity. Being present here, even if you're vulnerable, doesn't mean that you're not strong enough. You can go and beat someone up, and it's totally. I mean, to put it very crudely,
we're gonna do that afterwards.
Sure. But exactly that. Like, being vulnerable doesn't mean that you are less masculine. No. At least some of my kind of friends or people that I've interacted, like, oh, this is too girlish. Like, it's not for me. And it's coming back to I started a solo episodes of archetypes, exploring that in the polar. You have the healthy archetype, which sits at the top, and then at the bottom you have the bipolar, dysfunctional ones, and you can see how many quote-unquote men right now are just still stuck in this immature phase of being boys. And people, I can't remember where I listened to this or someone mentioned it, people blaming the patriarchy for everything bad that happened, even though it brought a lot of good things. It actually isn't patriarchy, because the men aren't actually men, they're still boys, so they're kind of like, oh, I didn't even think about it from that perspective.
Well, I think it's interesting about the patriarchy, because I've written a few pieces about it on my website, and it's informed by people I've read and talked about. But I think this idea that the patriarchy favors men, the reality in all men. I think the reality is that it favors some men, but actually a lot of men suffer under the patriarchy for the same reasons. They suffer under the, purely in a work situation, the whole thing of working for someone else. The lack of 3 key things: mastery, autonomy, and purpose. So they struggle with lack of purpose sometimes. They struggle with lack of autonomy and ability to make their own decisions. And they're working towards a mastery or feeling like they're actually doing something of value and acquiring something. And a lot of the men are under a lot of pressure, and they're not. You can only see it when we do those processes in the retreats around the frustration that men carry. All those times we're compromised in our life, like day to day, and we're in that sort of. I guess it's not in the broader sphere. It's not a conversation which happens, because there's a lot of. There's aspects of masculinity which need to be looked at in the whole, sexual violence and terrible things which are happening still and are starting to come to the surface. But men suffer too, and it's their suffering which actually is leading to all that stuff.
See, that's the thing. When people say toxic masculinity, that's not a good example of masculinity. That's actually the absence of masculinity that's really toxic.
Yeah.
And leading to all these, sexual assaults and violence towards women. And that's not what a man would do. Like, it's really stuck in those, again, boys, and maybe out of trauma they will try to punish others. And
well, it's important to really look at that thread, because it's very easy to say, look at men's behaviour, it's terrible, and actually what's been missed sometimes is the fact that the perpetrators of that are at the end of a cycle of real suffering. And that's why this men's work, and more making available more resources for men to equip themselves to release that frustration and to release the patterns which they've inherited. These are cycles of family cycles which go back generations of patterns of male behaviour and violence. It's why it's so important to have this available to men, to have these conversations and this permission to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
And I can see it happening. These things, tragic events that often lead to great change. But they're giving more permission to really talk about stuff which is important. In the wider public sphere, especially.
I read a book recently called The Return of the King by the same authors who did write the King, Warrior, Magician, Lover.
Right.
So I think it was Douglas Gillette and can't remember the second name.
Yeah.
But they were saying that this it's a generation thing where you'd normally go through a generation where, let's say, a man isn't initiated, and that's going to trickle down to his son and then the other son. So they kind of said it takes 3 or 4 generations for something like this to be brought up more, and the person, or maybe the son or the great son, great
grandson.
Yeah, grandson would actually see all these patterns and say, okay, everything stops here. So 3 or 4 generations of maybe abuse or maybe unhealthy patterns need to show for that to actually be finished.
Well, I think
maybe more. I last thing just to add to that, there was this American football player, and it took him 6 generations to realize that his father was abusive towards his mother and himself, because his grandfather wasn't there, great grandfather wasn't there for him. Went all 6 generations for that, that, and it was just like, okay, this is where it needs to stop.
Well, and I'm a firm believer in that. I mean, some of the work that I've done is called family constellation work. Where, and if anything, I think this is really, because you asked earlier about my connection with New Zealand and the Maori culture. This ties in very strongly with their understanding what it is to be, in the world. They live with their lineage. They live, when they introduce themselves, and Maori people, when they introduce themselves, it's called a mihi, an introduction. You actually say, this is where I'm from. So this is my river, this is my mountain. And then often they'll say, this is my canoe, which goes back to which canoe their tribe was in when they arrived in New Zealand.
Wow.
And then they will know their lineage back from the different, they're called tribe is iwi, and then hapu is sub-tribe. So they'll know their tribe lineage, but they'll also know the people dating back however many generations that is. And they'll come back to themselves. So they'll be aware of their lineage, and they'll talk about themselves last. So their perception of themselves is that we're just here on earth at this point in time, but I've got all these ancestors behind me, and I've got all these people in front of me. So all I'm here for, I'm here on it's that whole thing, on the shoulders of giants. I'm here on the back of my ancestors, so I honour them for being here and for who I am, and I'm going to try and lay the foundations for the people to come.
So there's also forward thinking that there's other generations coming. Wow. Okay.
And they actually have a saying: they walk through life walking forwards but facing backwards. So they carry their past with them day to day, and it's why they feel things which happened historically so strongly, and a lot of indigenous cultures do. Are still carrying that, and carrying the pain of some of those things, and so in terms of rites of passage, I think it's more about the way they live. They live in a sense of being connected to a wider community, to their tribe and to their sort of where they're from, which is wider than the family. So in a way, there's protocols within that Maori culture. You go back to the marae, which is the community sort of home, home marae. You'll go there, and I've had the real honour of, I don't have Māori blood or I don't have Māori connection, but I grew up in a part of New Zealand which is quite strongly connected with Māori. Mm-hmm. It's actually quite fundamental in the sort of conflict between, in the Waikato there were a lot of wars originally, and when the British came, they basically just sort of, what they do, they just sort of come in and then they flood the population and, get a foothold and then sort of drive out by pure weighted numbers, really.
Yes.
So there's a lot of very strong history around where I'm from. Mm. But I've had the privilege of going onto marae and being in touch with that culture, the whole thing, of being invited on, being looked after, being fed. You give gifts and you offer something, but there's almost like a amnesty. That would happen throughout. When you're invited onto the marae, the host sets the protocol. But you cease hostilities. You'd have warring parties coming together and meeting on the marae. But once you're on the marae, you're on sacred land, and you're a visitor, and you'll be looked after. And that whole thing of everyone pitching in, and sharing food, and creating food, and celebration, all that stuff happens. I don't know how I got into that.
No, it brings another point. I did ayahuasca maybe 4 or 5 months ago.
Okay.
Yes, and
what was that here in this country?
It was actually in the Netherlands.
Okay.
Yeah, with a shaman that's been kind of living with Brazilian natives, etc. So he was kind of continuing the work. And what particularly struck me there is exactly everybody kind of brings the food, but everybody is sharing. So we sit on a big table together after the first ceremony, the morning, where everybody's kind of conscious, and we sit down and there was food prepared, but also everybody's kind of chipping in, and that again comes back to what we did in Thailand. What you were telling me about your passion for cooking. That was again coming back to this. Really, this feels really good. Like this feels very natural, very nice. Like maybe I was to some extent maybe lucky because back home, when I'm originally from Bulgaria, we didn't just sit the immediate family would get cousins and sit on a big table, and that feeling was just like oh wow, this feels like home. Like these people are a family. Everybody's a brother and a sister here. Yeah. So I can see how food will play a huge role into that.
Yeah.
Who do you cook at home now?
Oh yeah. I cook a lot, and I mean it varies. What tends to happen is because I've got 2 young kids. You end up focusing on making sure the kids are eating and happy. But
you take the second place.
I have to tell you a little story. We because we went back to New Zealand, and I was there over Christmas and New Year with my family, and we had a wonderful time this summer there, and it was very nourishing. I went back to places which are very connected for me. But we realised we need to look at exactly that, the way we share food and create a family life. And came back home, and I've had this big pine table, which is it's almost like the sort of thing I found for I was 20 quid, and it's great. It's like great, yes. But it takes up the whole room. Just sits in the corner, and we would end up eating as a family around the breakfast bar and just sort of perched around. And I realised it just didn't work anymore. We weren't really using it, and it was taking up all this room. So we bought a round table like this when we came back, and we have our family chairs around it. And since we've come back, we've had family meals and all sitting down. And it's, and we've actually made a policy now. We were getting a bit sucked in of letting our daughter watch TV, and after she came home from school, it's like, okay, no, we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to have time together as a family. We're going to draw. We're going to, talk about stuff. We're going to play music. We're going to dance, and we're going to sit down as a family and eat. And it's been about a couple of weeks or a month, I think, 3-4 weeks. And the difference it makes to actually create that environment. This is all part of those incremental things. It's like changing the environment will help you just change life patterns. If and it'll stop you living in survival or grabbing things on the run and I'm just going to stand up and eat this thing here.
Yeah.
Sit down, be with the people, put your phones away.
Yes.
Actually connect with what's going on and look at creating something else, creating a different experience.
It is a ritual. It is a ritual. Serving food, preparing the food,
Yeah.
having together. That's what I miss right now. 'Cause I was in Thailand and we very much used to do that with a lot of friends. Whereas here it's like everybody's kind of in their rooms or just like, hey, I need to leave out and consciously slowing down a little bit. Yeah, it's
watching your phone, shoveling your food.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And I try to really enjoy that, like stop for a moment and really enjoy the food. You don't have to go and hunt for it. You don't have to prepare. You don't have to cook it. Everything is done for you. I mean, that's one of the kind of, I can't remember where it came from, but success has defeated us in a way that like all of this convenience actually is gone to the point where now it's becoming a little bit of there's a backlash to it maybe.
It's quite scary actually, you know, this whole, even it keeps going to different levels, you know, the sort of the distance away from what that experience brings of taking time, sitting down, creating food and sharing food together and allowing time for it, where it's just that's all you're focusing on. And what's missing as well, it's almost like it's reflective of our relationship to the earth. It's like that's one of the key opportunities we have to be grateful and to be connected to the wider ecology. You know, it's like, wow, where's this food come from? You know, how has this food ended up on my plate? Where does it come from? You know, the farmers that have grown the crops or the, you know, raised the livestock, whatever. This is, you know, that moment to actually just be really, that whole thing of having grace is like, I'm tuning into something here. I'm not just feeding my face or fueling myself. It's a moment to be really connected with our place in the biosphere and our place as part of the wider world, and to share it with others and to really to be with others. And it's a spiritual practice. If you know, I'm not. I'm trying to draw attention to it. I don't. You know, it's not like I do that all the time. And
same with me. Yeah, it's important to put it out there and to really be conscious of that. It doesn't necessarily that you're always gonna get it right.
No.
Nobody's perfect.
Well, you know,
nobody likes perfect people, to be honest. Everybody wants to be able to relate to someone. Oh yeah, I did this as well. I did this. So
it's not about being a monk, you know. It's like I'll go and have a Byron burger and absolutely love it. You know, it's not about being, you know, rigid either, but actually experiment. Just try that out. What is it like to have a conscious meal where you share? Just how do I feel when I really engage with that and give it full attention? You know, and actually your body responds to food very differently when you do that. You know. And actually, that it's actually quite a challenge, you know, because often we will do that for other people. The big challenge is to do that for yourself. You're like, right, I'm going to sit down and make a meal, and I'm going to do it like I'm preparing for a date, and I'm going to sit down and I'm going to, you know, I'm going to present my meal and I'm going to enjoy it and I'm going to take time over it and be grateful for it. You know,
I find that whenever I prepare the food, maybe it's a kind of a placebo effect, I don't know, but when I prepare the food, when I know how much time, I need to put like this and like put all the spices in, I really enjoy it. I mean, I wouldn't say that I enjoy it more than like food that I buy. It's not necessarily a clear distinct, but there is something in working for something and then actually reaping the benefits after that. That maybe that are really really nourishing, really, you feel like, oh wow, I actually worked for this and this is something that I made.
Maybe I can share something around that, because the thing that drew me to food, I think, is there's such a magic about it, there's such an invention, you know, especially when you explore it and you learn different techniques and flavours and things, but it's actually, I remember when I got to the point of my training where I started cooking for large groups of people, you know, so through the Concord I would pick up I'd do these cooking courses and I got to the point where I can cook for retreats and I can cook for 40, 50 people, you know, but to actually do that it's almost like it's a very pure form of leadership and creativity, because you're reliant on working with a team. Obviously it's almost the perfect illustration of having a vision and going, right, okay, this is the menu, this is sort of what we're going to do, and then you start bringing in other people to do things, and you find that they don't do stuff, you know, if you give them space, they'll interpret things, or you'll get a sense of whether they're good for doing something or not,
Mm-hmm.
but then they'll bring their own qualities to the mix.
Yeah.
And you'll find someone who's like, oh my God, she's just amazing at chopping. She'll just like perfectly do that. Some other guy will be like, well, he cut that in a completely different way. I had no idea. I'd not even conceived of doing it that way, but that adds something. Or someone will come up with a suggestion. And you're in access to your own intuition. You'll be like, you're cooking something and say, oh, it needs something. And then you'll see something, like on the table. So, oh, it just needs that. And you'll just know from your own instincts. So it actually develops as your sensibilities. And it's not just taste, it's more about your sort of full senses are totally engaged. And it's, for me, it was like pure creativity, which is not about me. It's not at all about me. It's like being in a place where you're dancing with it and you're creating things which are beyond what you can conceive. And that to me is like, that's real. It's not about I did this. And it can become that, but it's something quite magical when you're in a place of that creativity and that expression.
Yeah, creativity, it's a meditative practice. Also, you're in service of others. It's not about me, it's about we and giving back and kind of being more ethnocentric than egocentric.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's
a funny thing, after you achieve a certain level of, let's call it success, however people wish to define that, and you kind of have all your needs met, whether it's the 7 Maslow's hierarchies or have the basics covered. Everything really becomes, if you're kind of a healthy, conscious human being, everything becomes about service. Really, that's where you get a lot of benefits, and somehow it actually comes back to you. It's a reciprocity, it's a balance, it's a cycle that one way or the other, maybe not necessarily straight away, but it's gonna come back to you. Yeah. I think it's important to be mindful of that. Yeah.
There's one thought I had on that. I've been doing a little bit of exploration. So what is it about? I think there's a little bit of a stigma around self-development work as this idea that it's really selfish or it's self-indulgent. But I think there's something called the selfishness paradox, is that the more you can make sure that you're happy and fulfilled in your life, naturally that's what happens, is that you're suddenly free up. If you're not battling for survival and just sort of battling with the elements and what life throws at you, eventually you start putting your attention to what you can actually contribute and what service you can be to other people, and it makes you more available. And I've spent a long time of my life preoccupied with getting out of my own shit, basically. But
everybody else, yeah.
And I think we're all a bit preoccupied with that, and that's what closes ourselves off. We're not which makes it important to deal with that, to really take some time to give it some attention. And then so what am I here for?
I can't remember who said it. Kind of used this quote: "If you're not growing, you're contributing. What are you doing?" And it's very, very understandable to be initially selfish. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing.
No.
Like take the cup for example. If it's full and you're giving, you can give from your overflow. But if it's like empty, it's how can you gift? How can you help and contribute to others?
For sure.
It's like getting to the plane, and they say put your mask first, otherwise you cannot help your child. Maybe the old lady next to you. I use this all the time, but I think it's a great metaphor. That it's okay to be selfish to a point where you have your needs met, and then from that start giving to others.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Listen, man, we can talk for another 2-3 hours without no rehearsal.
Yeah.
Any kind of final words, or where can they find you?
Well,
they want to work with you. They want to see more of your work.
Yes. Well, I have a website under my name, so it's Kevin Helas. I think maybe we could put a link on there. But I call my work life navigation. I think that's sort of key. I really want to support men in their own self-realization and growth and development. So that's my purpose. So I do one-to-one coaching with men, but I also am developing more programs around that. I'm doing this research project around the Man-to-Man project. I'm really curious for people to get involved, to talk about their relationships with men. I'm also planning on setting up a sort of a masterclass, which will be an online program, which is about, I think ultimately I'm looking to support men find their place in the world, and it's all about being and belonging. So that's about finding their power and empowerment as men, and also accepting themselves as men as they are. You
Yes.
know, and I'm preparing a program which is around exploring different aspects of that, about building that muscle, of like finding out who we are and what we're about, what our purpose is. So yeah, and I'm really, obviously I'm involved in the men's workshops with Rebel Wisdom as well, but I'm looking to develop my own programs around that. There'll be more to come this year. Yeah.
Wow, I'm excited and looking forward to that. You're doing very special work. Thank you very
Pleasure.
much, sir.
Thank you for having me, Pavel.
Thank you very
So
much
you.
for being here. And guys, thanks for listening. Please go and check Kevin's work. I gotta tell you, like his work is really transformation. I've been lucky enough to be exposed to some of that at the retreat that we did together, and his presence is, yeah, exactly what I think men need more of today. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next episode. If you've stayed up until the end and you've really enjoyed this podcast, here is my promise to you. I will make sure this podcast gets only better and better over time, but I'm gonna need your support. So if any of this resonated with you, make sure to hit the subscribe button, the notification bell, and I'll see you on the other side. Thank you.